I'll tell you, I met this fellow once who could have been the poster child for the modern outdoor industry. His pack looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. Carbon frame, titanium cookware, a stove that whispered rather than roared. Even his socks were made from some temperature-adaptive fibre. He introduced himself at the trailhead, chest out, grinning with the confidence of a man who'd spent more money than miles in the woods. I was tightening the worn leather straps on my old canvas rucksack, and he gave it a glance that said, "Bless your heart." The morning was cool, the mist still rising off the pines, and we were both headed up toward Eagle Ridge. He for a weekend trial of his new ultralight life, me for the quiet I always find at that overlook. I watched him start off at a brisk pace, his carbon trekking poles clicking like metronomes. "You sure you're good without GPS?" he asked over his shoulder. I held up a compass and a folded topo map that's seen more weather than some people's tents. "Never failed me yet," I said. He smiled politely, the kind of smile that belongs on someone convinced they're in on a joke you don't get, and disappeared up the switchback. I took my time. The air smelled of damp needles and loam, and every step brought birdsong and the hush of far-off water. I caught up with him halfway up the ridge, where he was hunched over his wrist device, frowning. "Satellite's patchy in these valleys," he muttered. I offered to show him the line of the old trail cut, but he waved me off with a laugh. "Technology's just catching its breath," he said, and strode ahead. When I reached the summit clearing an hour later, the sun was lowering and the ridge was bathed in amber light. He wasn't there. The wind whispered through the spruces, carrying that stillness you can almost hear, and I figured he'd either stopped short or taken one of the game trails that spider off the main path. Sure enough, not 20 minutes later I heard a faint voice somewhere downslope. I found him kneeling beside a dead GPS unit, shaking it as though it owed him an apology. The screen was black as midnight. "Battery died," he said. "Didn't think I'd need to pack spares for a 2-day trip." His ultralight lantern had already blinked out earlier, he told me, and his fancy rechargeable stove had stopped working too. "I was just going to use the GPS light to cook by," he added sheepishly. I handed him my old oil lantern, its glass smudged with years of soot. "She's not smart," I said, "but she's steady." The glow filled that small clearing, soft and golden, and his shoulders dropped like he'd been holding his breath since the trailhead. He followed me back to camp, step by uncertain step, and I could feel his pride cooling like embers under rain. We made camp in a narrow hollow where a creek ran clear over smooth stones, its sound gentle as breathing. I watched him unpack his gear, each item snapping open or inflating or charging, tiny miracles that looked fragile under the fading sky. His tent went up in under a minute. No poles, no stakes, just a press of a button and a hum. My old canvas shelter took longer, but when the wind rose, I noticed how his ultralight dome shivered like a leaf, while mine only sighed. He tried to boil water on his sleek silver stove, but the battery refused to cooperate. "Supposed to last 40 hours, he grumbled, thumbing the power button. 40, huh? I said, laying out kindling and striking my flint. The spark caught easy on the dry birch bark, and in moments the fire was dancing, a warm, crackling heartbeat between us. He watched like he was seeing something ancient, something that didn't need firmware updates or Wi-Fi signals to work. "Guess that's primitive tech," he said, half joking, half ashamed. "Oldest one there is," I replied. The smell of smoke crept through the air, and the light brushed across our faces in shifting amber tones. He sat closer, his gadgets piled neatly beside him, silent now in the dark. From my pack, I pulled a small tin kettle, dented and blackened, and set it on the stones. "You drink coffee?" I asked. "Sure," he said, "but instant." I just smiled and poured ground straight into the bubbling water. For a long while, we didn't talk. The forest took over the conversation, the creek murmuring, a barred owl calling somewhere down the valley, the occasional whisper of something small moving through leaves. When I finally handed him the tin mug, he took a sip and hissed. It was hot, strong, and earthy. "Not bad," he admitted. "You can't buy that flavour," I told him. "Only comes from smoke and patience." Later, while we ate, he confessed he'd never really been out without some kind of digital backup. "I read blogs, watched videos, got all the gear," he said, "but I don't think I ever learned what to do if it doesn't work." His voice had softened, humbled by the firelight. "Happens to the best of us," I said. "Nature's got a way of trimming down your ego to size." When the stars came out, they poured across the sky like a river of cold fire. He looked up for a long time, the blue glow of his dead smartwatch barely visible in his lap. "Funny," he murmured. "I spent so much money to feel connected. Turns out all I had to do was look up." I smiled at that. The woods have a way of teaching you things your wallet can't buy. Morning came slow and silver, the kind that makes every pine needle glisten with dew. The fire had burned down to ash and a few lazy curls of smoke. My companion stirred inside his tent. Well, what was left of it? Sometime in the night, one of the air beam supports had collapsed. The thing looked like a deflated balloon draped over his gear. I was pouring water from the creek into my kettle when I heard a soft curse. "Guess your tent's got the same warranty as your GPS," I said with a grin. He chuckled, a little embarrassed. "Supposed to be self-repairing," he muttered, tugging at the fabric. "Maybe it's just self-retiring." I offered him a bit of my old canvas tarp to wrap around the broken side, and together we rigged it with cord and branches until it looked almost respectable. As we worked, the woods woke up, warblers calling from the high limbs, chipmunks scolding us for trespassing in their kitchen, the smell of damp moss rising with the light. Breakfast was simple: oatmeal, apples, and the rest of that strong coffee. He chewed quietly, looking down at the flame. "I used to think people who carried heavy old gear were just stubborn," he said finally. "But I get it now. There's comfort in things that don't quit on you." I nodded. Sometimes the weight you carry is the price of knowing it'll last. We broke camp mid-morning, following the ridge toward a small lake I'd mentioned the night before. He tried again to use his digital compass app, dead as stone. I showed him how to line up the real compass with the contour lines on my map, how to read the slope of the land, and the way the water always runs toward the valley floor. He took to it slow, cautious, like a man learning to trust his own hands for the first time. By noon, the air had turned sharp and grey. The wind changed its tune, coming from the north, carrying the metallic taste of rain. "Should we hurry?" he asked. I looked at the sky, then the ridges rolling into haze. "We'll be fine if we find cover before the thunder does." He reached for his phone again, instinct maybe, but stopped halfway and stuffed it back into his pocket. "Lead the way," he said simply. We picked our path through the brush as the first drops began to fall, soft and cold. His fancy waterproof shell beaded beautifully for all of 10 minutes before the seams started leaking. My waxed canvas coat, scarred and faded, held fast. I caught him glancing at it with quiet admiration. "Old tech," I said, "still works." By the time the storm hit full, we'd found a shallow overhang of rock. The rain came down in curtains, and thunder rolled like boulders tumbling through the clouds. We huddled there, listening to the storm's fury and the steady drip of runoff at our feet. "You ever think," he said softly, "that maybe we make things too easy for ourselves, and that's why we forget how to really live out here?" I didn't answer right away. I just watched the rain streak across the valley and thought, maybe that's the truest thing he's said yet. When the rain finally let up, the forest smelled of life itself. Wet pine, earth and stone breathing together. Mist drifted between the trunks like slow smoke. The young hiker brushed water from his jacket, which looked more wilted than waterproof now, and laughed quietly to himself. "All this gear," he said, shaking his head, "and the only thing that's worked right today is your 50-year-old lantern," I grinned. "That's the trick of it. The woods don't care how much something costs, they only care if it works." He nodded, thoughtful, watching the mist lift from the trees. We waited another hour before moving on, letting the ground dry enough to keep our footing. The trail down from the ridge was steep narrow and slippery in places where the runoff had carved small channels overnight. He slipped once or twice, but each time caught himself with the wooden walking stick I'd lent him. "Better than carbon fibre," he said with a smile. We reached the lake by early afternoon. The water was glassy, reflecting clouds that still looked bruised with leftover rain. I set down my pack, took out a small tin of tobacco, and rolled myself a pipe while he unpacked his lunch, a vacuum-sealed assortment of trail bars and powdered drink mixes. He frowned at them, like they'd betrayed him, then eyed my own fare, a hunk of bread, a wedge of cheese, and an apple wrapped in cloth. I tore the apple in half and handed him a piece. "It's not freeze-dried," I said, "but it'll do." He bit in and smiled through the juice. We sat on a fallen log, eating in silence while the world around us hummed softly. Dragonflies stitching across the shallows, frogs croaking under cattails, the low wind rippling through spruce tops. "You know," he said after a while, "I bought all this gear because I thought it'd make me safer. But out here, safety feels more like knowing what to do when things don't go as planned." "That's the whole secret," I said. "The mountains don't test your equipment, they test you." He let that settle between us for a long while. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the dead GPS, turning it over in his hand. The screen caught a bit of the afternoon light, dull and cracked. Without a word, he set it on the log beside him, like a relic left behind. "Guess I'll navigate the old way," he said. I handed him the map. "Then start by finding where you are." He studied it carefully, tracing contour lines with his finger, lips moving slightly as he read the names: Raven Hollow, Timber Run, Pine Shoulder. Then he looked up and pointed in the right direction without my help. "There," he said confidently. I gave a small nod. "Looks like you're learning." As the light deepened and the clouds drifted east, he packed up slowly, this time with a kind of reverence. No rushing, no frustration, just the calm rhythm that comes when you finally sync your heartbeat with the forest's own. I could see it in him now, the quiet beginning of respect, not for me, but for the land and the old simple ways that keep you alive in it. That evening, we made camp beside the lake. The sky turned to gold, then copper, then a deep indigo so rich it felt you could fall into it. I gathered driftwood while he pitched his tent again, carefully this time with real stakes instead of the auto-deploy function. I could tell he was proud when it held its shape against the evening breeze. The fire crackled to life with a few strikes of my flint, and soon the smell of burning pine sap filled the air. He sat across from me, poking at the fire with a stick, eyes glowing orange in the light. "You ever think," he began, "that all this technology we carry is just a way to convince ourselves we're not small?" I smiled at that. "You're starting to sound like an old-timer," I said. He chuckled. "Guess I had a good teacher." We cooked supper over the coals, beans and a bit of jerky for me, some dehydrated meal for him that actually turned out edible once mixed with the boiled lake water. When the stars came out, he leaned back on his elbows and just stared. "You can't see this where I live," he whispered. "Too much light." I nodded, taking a slow breath. The lake mirrored the sky so perfectly that it was hard to tell where the world ended and the heavens began. After a long silence, he spoke again, softer this time. "You know, when I bought all that gear, I thought I was buying confidence. Like if I had the right stuff, I couldn't fail. But I was scared the whole time until things went wrong. Then it was different, simpler somehow." "That's the trick of the wild," I said. "It takes everything away from you until you realise you didn't need most of it." He poked the fire again, sparks swirling up like tiny fireflies. "Guess I'll have to go home and tell everyone the old guy with the rusty lantern saved my trip," he said with a grin. "Tell them the forest saved it," I corrected. "I just happened to be standing there." Later, when the coals dimmed and the loons began their mournful calls across the water, we sat in companionable quiet. He pulled his sleeping bag around his shoulders and said, "You think I'll ever get it right, doing this without overthinking it?" I looked at the stars flickering above us and said, "You already did. You're here, aren't you?" When dawn came, We parted ways at the trailhead. His pack looked lighter, not because it weighed less, but because he finally understood what he didn't need to carry. He shook my hand, real gratitude in his grip, then started down the road with a compass dangling from his neck and the map tucked in his pocket. I watched him go, the forest still damp with morning light, and felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. Maybe he'd come back someday, maybe not. But the woods had given him what all that gear couldn't, a little humility, and the kind of confidence that doesn't come from batteries or brand names, just from knowing the way home when the trail disappears.